Hello, everyone. I'm Tracy Derwin, and I'm here with Shane Buell and our special guest, Derrick Broze. Thank you so much, Derrick, for taking the time to talk to you. But we've been wanting you to come on for some time, so I will let Shane introduce you and let everyone know what you've been doing.
All right. It's my pleasure to introduce my personal friend, Derrick Broze, who I've known since about 2017. Derrick Broze is an activist and independent investigative journalist who writes for The Last American Vagabond, as well as being the founder and editor of the Conscious Resistance Network for multimedia journalism, exploring liberty and spirituality. He has also published 5 books focused on solutions, including How to Opt Out of the Technocratic State. He is also the creator and producer of several documentaries, including the 5G Trojan Horse and the Pyramid of Power series. So, welcome to the show today, Derrick.
Hey, thank you guys for having me on. I appreciate it. Looking forward to this conversation.
All right. So, we've been trying to get you on since I think the UN Summit of the Future, because I know you had gone to attend that. And I was going to try to reach out to you around that time because our audience is actually very familiar. We cover, smart cities and the UN Sustainable Development Goals and things like that. But I know that you're a little bit more of an expert on those things than me. And so I wanted to go into some of that now. So, if you could, I guess just really quickly, give our audience a quick idea of who you are and what you do, and then we'll get into the details.
Sure. Again, thank you for having me on, guys. Shane, you outlined a few of the things there that I do. For those who are not familiar with my work, I've been doing activism, independent media for going on 16 years now, starting in late 2009, early 2010. I'm originally from Houston, Texas, and that's where my activism started with just on the ground stuff, protests, marches, rallies, those usual things, but also always been very solutions focused. So got involved in urban farming and community gardening and hosting skill shares and documentary screenings and passing out flyers. And I've done, any number of different forms of activism over the years. I am not a political guy, but I also did run for mayor twice in Houston, where I'm originally from, in an effort to reach people and to get the message out about some of these topics we're going to discuss today, particularly smart cities and 5G. Which is something I really tackled heavily in Houston, because Houston was actually the first city in the United States that announced themselves as the world's first 5G smart city back in September 2018. My activism over the years evolved into journalism because I started to realize that the media, particularly the local media, but also obviously the national, international media, couldn't be trusted to do their jobs accurately. We had a situation where the group that I started, the Houston Freethinkers, we were making the news and really starting to make some waves in the community, getting a lot of support, but also getting traction and attention in the media. And we had an incident where, we had one of our festivals, our music art activism festivals, and the police showed up and pulled a shotgun out on a crowd of 100 unarmed people and then grabbed me and arrested me for no reason and let me out the next day. And when the media reported on this, they reported that a group of local conspiracy theorists surrounded the police, and it made it sound like we were the aggressors. And it was things like that that really helped me see that I think I could probably do this better. And I wasn't originally trained as a journalist. I didn't go to journalism school. I've since taken journalism courses once I started to take it more seriously. But it evolved out of my activism and just doing citizen journalism, going around with a small camera, doing cop watching, filming police, showing up to press conferences and asking the mayor and asking the police chief hard questions. And then eventually, starting to confront politicians on the national and international level, and recognizing that this was something I had a passion for. As you mentioned, I started the Conscious Resistance Network, theconsciousresistance.com, in 2013. And that is where I host my documentaries, my books, interviews, podcasts, all that good stuff. And I also do a lot of public speaking and really try to focus on empowering people. So part of my message, and I guess my tactic, is using journalism to educate and inform people about topics that they're not going to hear from the corporate media and even maybe the mainstream alternative media. And then at the same time, trying to say, here's some ideas, here's some solutions and some things we might actually be able to employ in our lives to try to better our lives. Because for me, I really been harping on this lately, that I don't know if it's enough to be awake or aware or conscious or whatever word you want to use, that instead I really been calling for people to be activated. Like, we need to be actually kind of participating in this ongoing battle, this information war that we're in. So yeah, I do a lot of different things: books, documentaries, public speaking. It's all geared to just trying to educate and inform myself, share that information with people, and then see what kind of solutions we might come up with.
Yeah, so one thing I get asked all the time, and I don't know how to answer this. So I know through this conversation, you're going to give us a lot of tips and advice. So we know we've been talking about how these natural disasters are setting up areas for smart cities. So people are always asking, so I know this is happening, and my area is probably going to be going through this process soon. What can I do? So that's why I'm really happy that you are here, because you're the expert. I just don't know how to answer that question. It's a very difficult question to answer. So thank you so much for bringing your expertise in this aspect. So yeah, I just wanted to make sure I let everyone know
Thank you.
that throughout this, we're going to give you guys like tangible actions and things that you can do to get involved if you want to prevent these, these things from coming to your area. So
Yeah, if I could just add to that real quick, just I think that, no matter what problem we discuss, there are steps and things I think generally speaking we can do to try to like empower ourselves. I like to talk about exiting from various systems and building alternative parallel systems. That's kind of my main focus. I don't really think the solutions are going to come through politics, and they're definitely not going to come through violence or through apathy and just giving up. But at the same time, there are a lot of big huge issues that aren't easily solved with just one quick step, or here's 5 things you can do and everything's fixed. And so it's important to recognize that sometimes we are dealing with some really big topics that us as individuals can't solve on our own. But sometimes the best thing we can do is just to keep talking about it, just keep spreading awareness, right? And trying to build this sort of, this movement of consciousness where people become aware of new topics, whether it's talking about some of the things you guys been focused on, like the fires and other issues, or smart cities, or how all these things interconnect. Like oftentimes there won't be a perfect solution to provide somebody, and the answer is just keep talking about it, keep spreading the information, even when it feels hopeless.
right.
I do have a question, I guess, about what we can do. Not necessarily, because I know that you might be familiar with the story of Perez Zeledon in Costa Rica, who had the Eco Barrio 15-minute city that was planned for there, and they had, a big protest, and they actually did prevent them from holding the vote, and a lot of the people who were supporting it had backed out. And it looks like they've at least temporarily defeated the smart city through political means, I will say. But what are some of the other solutions, the non-political solutions that you recommend for opting out of the technocratic state?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that story in Costa Rica, but that's good to hear. I'll share another story about some of my early activism that I think will provide some answers to the question. One of the, I think, proudest moments as far as like tangible differences that you can point at and say, look, we did that as an activist, that I really am just so proud of, was back in 2012. And for those in the United States, we have the Transportation Security Administration, the TSA at the airports, searching people, groping people, all that fun stuff. And back in the 2010s, there was definitely a lot of resistance to it because, for those who can remember, this was a post 9/11 program that rolled out a few years later after an alleged false flag attack. Well, an alleged terrorist attack. An actual false flag attack was the first. You had the underwear bomber, then you had the shoe bomber. And these things led to the rolling out of body scanners and TSA pat downs and all this kind of stuff. And so there was a big movement back then to push back against these. And I was going to the airport and passing out flyers and encouraging people to opt out of the body scanners and just giving out information, and had some interesting experiences at that time. But then in April, I think April 2012, the DHS showed up, the Department of Homeland Security. Some of their officials showed up to Houston. They had this big press conference, and they announced that they were going to be rolling out the TSA agents. They're not really even officers, but the TSA agents were going to be now going on different buses and different bus stops and randomly checking IDs of people who are choosing to ride the bus, searching people's bags or purses, just total violations of the Fourth Amendment. Like there's nothing that anywhere that says because you buy a bus ticket, you automatically give up those rights to be free from search and seizure. So when this announcement came out, obviously those of us in Houston who were paying attention at that time really just were like, what can we do? That we can't let this happen. This is definitely not good news. And they actually did like a big announcement, and they had the TSA out searching people and stuff like that for at least one day that we know of. And then they claimed they caught some people smoking weed, and they caught a prostitute or something. No terrorists of any kind, but just probably harassing and violating a lot of people's rights in between them. And so myself and the Houston Freethinkers and some other activists we knew, we got together. We found out that Metro, which was the bus company, that the Houston Metro that was partnering with the TSA, that they had a board meeting coming up in about a week or so. So we decided, let's put all of our energy into that. And we actually showed up with about 50 people deep. And then there was also a lawyers organization locally that showed up, and then just other people who were just concerned. And this meeting, all the media, local media showed up, 100 plus people were in the room. The board, of directors, they're used to nobody showing up to their meetings. They have these meetings monthly and nobody pays attention. So they were super overwhelmed. The cameras were all there. We all got to go up and say our little public piece, and people are quoting Benjamin Franklin, and the lawyers are telling them, please do this so we can sue you for violating people's rights. And they said, okay, we weren't prepared for this. So we're going to set another meeting in a week and a half to really deal with this topic. And so we organized again and just made sure we brought even more people to show up, made sure the media showed up. And by the end of that second meeting, they shut down the entire program, and it's never been back. It's now 13 years since that happened. And, that was maybe a combination of political and activist means, because, this is a board of directors for a private company that partners with the city, right? So we didn't have to go vote to sort of overturn the program. We never got to vote for it in the first place. But we did use our voices in the public means and really just getting bodies out there and people expressing themselves. And of course, that media pressure too, which we've gotten pretty good at over the years, getting the media to show up by doing press releases and things like that. And the program was completely shut down. That made the news again, of course. And it was just, like I said, another kind of big victory that I can look back and like, hey, even though the Houston Freethinkers and the activist group we were a part of for years, it was a huge part of my life for about 8 years, doesn't exist anymore, but that was one thing that still stands. I think those sort of stories are examples of how when people come together and they get organized, we can really express our voices. And sometimes you can end up with those kind of results where you get the result you want. You shut down the program, you stop something bad, or, prevent something from starting in the first place. Obviously, it doesn't always turn out that way. I've been in other situations where we've rallied the troops together and went to city council or commissioner's court or school board or what have you, and they don't listen and they don't respond and say a single word. They barely acknowledge we're there. And those times can be frustrating as well. So I think that, in general, we need to be better organized, I would say, just as sort of one tip. Getting better organized in your activist communities, your groups, whether that's online. Of course, I encourage in-person interaction as much as possible, like getting to know people in your backyard, in your local community, at least in the 10 to 15 mile radius of where you're at, just knowing other like-minded people, starting to get together, having some sort of social gatherings because people need to get stuff off their chest, but also more importantly, taking space and time to really communicate about your goals. What are the things we're concerned about? Whether it's we're concerned about these fires coming, or we're concerned about Agenda 2030, we're concerned about smart cities. Okay, what are the different local ways that we can push back against this? I'm always a big proponent of trying to reach the people in your community. So we spend a lot of time, weekends going out as a group of people, and I'm talking all ages, and sometimes 2 or 3 people, sometimes 10, 15, 20 people hitting the streets, passing out flyers. Back in the day, we would burn DVDs, and pass out DVDs with different documentaries on them. Just trying to build that awareness on a local level. Obviously, social media can be a good way to do this, but I don't think we should forget or ignore the in-person interaction. There's something much stronger and tangible when you meet a person in the street and you hand them a flyer and they say, oh my God, I care about this too. I didn't know there was other people out here. How do I connect with you guys? How do I join up with you? And things just keep growing and keep growing. And I did this for about 8 to 10 years of my life, every month, hosting documentary screenings, going out to the street every month for some event to pass out flyers or to go push back, or going to city council, like really emphasizing the localization aspect of this. Like each of us who are going to be hearing and participating in this conversation are going to be coming from different areas of the world. And it's important that we all fight to sort of preserve liberty, but also to preserve the land and the causes and the things we care about in our own backyards, as much as sharing things on the internet.
That makes me think of a story I've been following regarding the Lahaina fires. Or the Maui fires. They have these police commission meetings every other or second Wednesday of the month. And I don't know if you're familiar with Chief Pelletier, but he's been criticized for doing all sorts of nefarious things. More recently, he's been named in one of the lawsuits against Diddy. He's included in that. But every time there's a meeting, nothing happens. That we do. I'm not there, but there are times where people come up, they testify, Sometimes very, very strong emotional testimonies come up, but we're still not able to, get him to resign, get someone to take him down. Even the mayor's recommended he go on leave. So, I mean, I don't know.
Yeah,
It starts to get
I share
really
that frustration.
discouraging.
I definitely
Yeah,
share that discouragement and frustration. I mean, I could tell you all day about times I've visited those different boards I mentioned, commissioners court, city council, et cetera, and been completely ignored. I've had times when we had dozens of people show up, hundreds of people show up. They don't all turn out like the one I said, where you actually get the results you want, as you guys know. And I think when that's the case, like, so for example, when I go to city council, I don't even live in Houston anymore, but it's still my hometown. So when I go visit, I still go to city council just to kind of talk crap to them and try to tell them what's going on. And I really do it these days, not with the expectation that I think, okay, the city council is going to get fluoride out of the water, as one example, or the mayor is going to listen to me when I'm speaking about these different things. In fact, I've come to realize over the years that they largely just sit there and play on their phones, or they just don't even
exactly.
pay attention. They're just, they're not even present. And so I go these days very much with the specific goal of getting that on the record. So all these meetings typically are televised, even if it's just, local public access TV. And then those are posted on the city or the county or town websites for the most part, or on their YouTube channels. And then I'll go there and I'll rip my little 2-minute, 3-minute section out. And then I'll go upload it on YouTube and all my channels and stuff. And in that way, I feel like, okay, even if I'm showing up there and it's not necessarily, they're not really listening to me right now, I can take this information, I can get it out to the internet. And then the ideal goal then would, the ideal outcome then would be that you generate more interest, more traffic, and the movement keeps growing. Again, not always going to be the outcome, but I have had some situations where one of my I think the first city council visit I did about 5G in October 2018 has 1 million views, that it's just, for whatever reason, it like really resonated with a lot of people and just went really viral. And it didn't stop 5G in Houston, but it did allow me to connect with a lot more people, to meet other people in the city who saw the video and who said, I'm concerned about this. I'm trying to fight this tower from being built next to this church and this and that. And overall, just contributed to being able to kind of grow that movement. And then from that, continue to try to leverage that movement and put pressure on the politicians. At the end of the day, though, I mean, the more we get to these big topics, like say 5G, smart cities, the direct energy weapons, these different technologies and tools that ultimately nobody's voting on, and they're out of the people's hands, that is where it can become more frustrating and challenging, because I can't prevent them from putting up a 5G tower. I mean, I could go
Mhm.
destroy it and get myself arrested, but what is that going to do in the grand scheme of things, right? Like, is that going to, and I understand there's people who start to feel strongly that way, of like, hey, these towers need to come down. And there's, a lot of kind of radical activists out there who are considering those things. And there may be a time and a place for those. Who knows? We might get to that point where it feels like that's the only move we got. But at the present moment, I think that, you sort of end up making yourself a martyr in that specific case. And so we have to just continue to be creative. And then, of course, the other aspect of this, and this is why I think it's important to sort of try to holistically expose the entire system, is that when you're trying to spread awareness about the topics you care about, as you guys know, these things can be throttled by the algorithm, they can be shadow banned. So then
Right.
your ability to reach the masses to grow your movement can be extremely, halted, and that's just another big aspect of this. So we're definitely dealing with a full frontal attack in a number of different ways, and there are a lot of powerful forces, corporations, obviously governments, and people behind them who do not want these topics to be made mainstream, or if they do make it to the mainstream, they just want it to be sort of something that people laugh at and make fun of. But I think ultimately, those of us who feel called, and clearly you guys feel called to do what you're doing, like, we just have to be as consistent and persistent as possible. And that doesn't always bear the results that we want. We don't always see the end goals that we want, or at least not as immediately as maybe we'd like them to be. But I think it's nevertheless important for us to keep fighting. I mean, I say that as somebody, like, I went to city council, I think last in October, November, when I was last in Houston, October. And I did 3 visits there, bringing them studies, the latest government studies on fluoride, printed out all the copies, sent it to their emails, made sure they had everything. And not a single one responded to me. And either, I think I did 2 or 3 visits, every time bringing them documentation, every time emailing them, and not a single one. I had some friends in city council in the past who would sort of throw me a bone and say, okay, Derrick, tell us some more, and kind of extend my time and give me a little more time to drop some knowledge on them. But for the most part, they don't care. They're not listening. They're not interested. And it's a sad state of affairs. I mean, it really sucks. That's one of the reasons why, even as somebody who considers myself an anarchist, I did run for mayor, not really with this intention or hope or belief that I was going to win, but because it felt like if somebody like me isn't at least running and getting on the TV shows and getting on the radio and getting in the, because the thing is, it opened up all these doors where I was getting invited to Republican groups and Democrat groups and white neighborhoods and black neighborhoods and poor neighborhoods and rich neighborhoods and high schools and old folks' homes, to spread this message and to talk about these ideas. And I was able to do that, and I'm grateful to do that. But I also didn't really have much optimism that the machine, even on the local level in a big city like Houston, was going to allow somebody like me to crack through much further than that.
Right. So basically, just don't get discouraged, keep going, and it'll probably lead to some progress in some way. Might not be exactly
so.
what you're trying to do, but at least a lot more people will know what you're trying to do and get involved. And just, I think a lot of it, especially in Hawaii, is just getting people interested in their government and getting them willing to do something, because the culture is very laid back, oh, just whatever, just let it go. And it's led to a really, really bad situation there in many different ways. And
I was going to say, I think that's a common feature of some of the more beautiful places in the world, is that a lot of people like to go to those places to chill and relax, not to go become an activist, right? So in their mind, they're like, what are you talking about? I'm too busy relaxing and enjoying the beauty of Hawaii or wherever else. I just got back from Costa Rica, actually. And there's a lot of more kind of conscious people who are trying these things, but at the same time, I think that is a big motivating factor. And the other thing is, it is a full-time job trying to keep yourself motivated, right? And wake up every day and just like keep going and keep pushing at the things we care about. And it's a whole nother job to try to motivate other people and to keep them activated. But I've found and it's not just a simple solution per se, but I think that the best thing we can do is just lead by example, is try to be an example of that person who is living in that right way and is fighting for the causes and things they care about. And even if that means, and I've been in this situation, sometimes you're out there standing alone, that's important too, because that one voice, that one body, it sends a message to other people that, hey, I can go out there and do that. I can become a part of something, even if it's a different issue or a different cause, whatever it may mean. You're inspiring other people then to have that same kind of courage and that same bravery. And that's really what we need more than anything.
Yeah. And every day is a challenge for me and Shane, just to find it in ourselves to keep going, even though it's an uphill battle. But I did want to really get your expertise. I know we've been kind of talking about the activism side, but Shane is really kind of more familiar with the smart city topic. So I'll stop talking now and let Shane ask those questions.
Okay. I did want to say that I spent my own fair share of time trying to do political action to change the government from the inside. And in my opinion, from my experience, it does appear to be, rigged from the inside to the point where it's almost impossible, to make really large victories like with political action. Sometimes there's those local victories like we saw in Costa Rica. But when it comes to what we can do to take action to be more free in our own lives of this technocratic state that's encroaching on all of us. Like, I know you wrote the book, How to Opt Out of the Technocratic State. So could you tell us a little bit more about the non-political action that we can take to opt out?
Yeah, absolutely. And if I could real quick, I just want to add one thing there to what you were saying there, Shane, just as another example, not to discourage anything, but just to, again, share from my real world experience, just briefly. The second time I ran for mayor of Houston in 2023, I was getting endorsements and I was getting a lot of support. And unfortunately, the previous mayor, who was the guy who brought 5G to the city, who I've confronted many times and who I did not have a friendly relationship with, he actually got the city attorney to deny my application, even though I had ran in 2019. And I have a felony from literally 20 years ago when I was 20 years old. And so they used that to disqualify me. So I wasn't able to run. But nevertheless, myself and the team I had built, we decided, let's still quote unquote campaign, but just focus on the issues and try to get the issues we care about still a part of the conversation. And one of the big things I was trying to do was to shrink the power of the mayor, because Houston's mayor is actually, besides Denver, is the strongest mayoral position in the country. And so, long story short, we helped pass this proposition that ended up being on the ballot. It was called Proposition A. And basically what it called for was to amend the city charter, basically the city constitution, to make it so that the mayor was not essentially a dictator. As it was prior to 2023, the mayor was the person who set the weekly city council agenda. The mayor is the one who appoints people. Pretty much, if you want to talk about anything, whether it's fluoride, 5G, homelessness, anything you might care about, if it's not on the official agenda, they put you all the way at the end. And like I was saying earlier, by that point, half the council's gone, they're on their phones, they're not paying attention. So you can only really be heard if you're an official agenda item. And the only way that happens prior to 2023 is if the mayor says so. So even in the past, when we were fighting to get fluoride out of the water, we had 4 or 5 out of 12 council members on our side. They all basically in the end would say, sorry, I can't do anything. Like, I support you, I'm down to talk about this, but I can't even get it on the agenda. So we put a lot of effort into passing this proposition, which was going to take away the power of the mayor. I was calling for like a complete abolishment of the office in a way, but this was a step in that direction to limit the mayor's power and to really give that power to the city council. And it passed with 80% of the city. Now, of course, it's important to know that in a city of 4 million people like Houston, only 200,000 people bother voting in the local elections. And so 80% is still like a tiny percent of the city. Anyways, nevertheless, it passed. And this was like, okay, cool. I didn't win for mayor. I didn't get to do campaign all the way, but we got this one thing passed. The energy is worth it. We passed defeated another bad law on the local level. And then sure enough, over the last year, as it was supposed to be implemented, the new mayor has come up with all sorts of fun, creative ways to avoid actually implementing it. So I just share that story to say that sometimes, even when we put all this energy into the political situation, we think we've won, as you were kind of alluding to, Shane, they'll find creative ways to then still, you didn't win. No, actually, right. We're going to make you jump through this hoop and jump through this hoop. So just wanted to share that's a real life frustration. It's not that I don't believe there's any potential or, worthy efforts, because I'm a sort of guy that tries everything I can, anything in my toolkit. But I've found more value in the solutions that you're asking me about now. So I did release a book called How to Opt Out of the Technocratic State. It's right here. People can download it for free at my website at theconsciousresistance.com/how-to. And there's a free audio book there, the free PDF and everything. And I originally published this in 2019, and then we updated it in 2022, sort of post-COVID edition with 5 new chapters and some new information based on what we'd seen and learned during COVID with travel restrictions and lockdowns and things of that sort. And I was writing this book in late 2019 out of my interest and my sort of passion for digital surveillance and digital rights. And that's been a big area that I've focused on with my journalism. And I had been studying facial recognition for years and looking at India's Aadhaar system, which is a digital ID system that's been around, one of the oldest ones, where they went around scanning more than 1 billion people's retinas to add them to this system. I was learning about social credit scores and digital IDs, CBDCs. All these things have become more popular now. But when I was writing in 2019, there weren't so many people talking about this and kind of warning about it. So the book is part like a warning. It's part history as well, about the history of the technocracy movement, the original movement from the 1930s and 40s. But it's also, as the title implies, very much a guide, a how-to, based on my own personal experience of lived experiences. Again, trying to lead by example, not just telling you ideas that I've never tried, as well as things that we have sourced from just the kind of worldwide freedom community. During COVID, I did a US tour and then a Mexico tour, traveling for a total of 4 months, just doing talks and doing community activism and really learning how people were dealing and navigating lockdowns and restrictions and all this stuff. And a lot of that information I ended up putting into the second edition of the book. And so what I advocate for in the book is what I call exit and build. This is just the idea that if you recognize that there are various systems that do not align with your values and your principles, then, and in fact, if we can sort of look forward ahead and see that we're on the path to a train wreck, and we can see there's Agenda 2030 and smart cities and you own nothing and be happy. Doesn't necessarily mean that's the only future, but that's definitely a future that some very powerful people are trying to create and shove us all into. And if we can see that coming, back to what I was saying earlier, okay, you're awake, you see the bad circumstances coming up ahead. But if you choose not to act, then I think that's a big failure, not only failing ourselves and failing our ancestors who got us here, but failing the coming 7 generations who are 100% dependent on us. So if we see that there are systems that are prone to becoming slavery systems, loss of privacy, loss of liberty, etc., then this is a call to action. We need to take steps to start exiting from those systems and building new systems, parallel systems, alternative systems, counter systems, underground systems, whatever you prefer. The idea being that we create alternatives to these mainstream, whether it's education, healthcare. I can get more deep into the details, but any different systems that you can think of, especially if in regards to COVID, we saw a lot of people, maybe, for example, being dependent on their local grocery store. And whenever it came time to go buy groceries, the grocery store is saying, hey, you can't come in if you don't have a jab, or if you don't have a test, a PCR test, or if you don't have a mask. And I think that was a big eye opener for a lot of people about maybe why they don't want to be dependent on some of these systems. But the general idea is, if you recognize that there are systems that don't align with your values and principles, start taking steps. It's not going to happen overnight. Start taking steps, come up with a plan to help you become less and less dependent on these systems, and then to build alternative systems. Or in the case of, like, for example, I'm not a technologist, I'm not a software engineer, I'm not a coder. I use technology, I appreciate it as a tool, but I don't know how to design it, I don't know how to build it. But I work with a lot of brilliant people who do, who are in the technological space in different areas, designing apps, de-Googling phones, different things like that. And so if you are not the one who is going to build the alternative systems, then support those who are building them. And that's really what I advocate for. It's also, again, like the way that I've tried to live my life. I mean, I personally haven't used a bank since 2008, and I don't talk to certain government agencies. I don't do anything special. I just, live my life and don't talk to them. And I try to limit my use of systems. Like, for example, we mentioned like opting out of the body scanners. That's still something I do whenever I have to fly. I've started opting out of the facial recognition that they're starting to roll out at the airports. There's little individual actions that I think we can do. And then, of course, as we come together in a community, in a sort of collective effort, and these things reach kind of a more mass scale, coordinated scale, we can start to see people exiting from these bigger systems. And again, hopefully within the long term, creating alternatives. I don't think this is some easy, quick fix. I don't think it's going to happen overnight, or even all of it's going to happen this year per se. But I do, in fact, I actually think that's a lie that we've been sold, this idea that there's any quick fixes, that all you have to do is go press a button and vote for somebody and all your problems are going to be solved, or simple things like that, or just go protest one day and everything's going to be fixed or whatever. And I think, in fact, our problems are unfortunately more complex and more structural. They're also often very much dependent on our own habits and our own actions. Many times, especially when it comes to, for example, digital surveillance and privacy, many of us are just choosing to give away our privacy, choosing to give away our data because we're not making the effort, and it's important for people to understand that the world is constructed in a way that the mainstream systems, whether that's education system, media, TV, Hollywood, etc., technology, electronic stores, I mean, we can go on and on. All these things are just designed to keep you kind of in this dominant culture, the dominant culture, which we know is not conducive to long-term liberty, privacy, thriving humanity. So just as one example, the technology piece. My buddy who runs abovephone.com, he's a technologist. He's working with a great team of people. They've been making de-Googled phones for a few years. Anybody can learn how to de-Google a phone if they want, but for those who don't want to, they de-Google the phone for you. They upload it with their own customized open source apps, and they make it really easy for people to get off that sort of mainstream technological system. You can't go to a Best Buy or to your mainstream electronics store in your local area and find those. You're going to find Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, Meta, et cetera, right? So you have to go out of your way, just like we know we can't trust the mainstream corporate media. We go out of our way to find alternative, independent sources of information. You have to do the same thing in all these different areas of your life. And I really do try to take a holistic approach to this. In the book, we talk about a number of areas, but I think there's 3 or 4 that are most important for people to look at. One of those would be the technology piece I was just talking about. Another would be the financial piece. And then, of course, healthcare is another big one. People recognize not wanting to be dependent on the mainstream healthcare systems. So finances, technology, healthcare, food, not being dependent on the mainstream food production or distribution systems, or trying to lessen your dependence. And I think it's also a spiritual thing as well. I talk about exiting and building from unhealthy mindsets and limiting beliefs as well. And so I do try to encourage people to take this holistic perspective. And what I would encourage each individual to do, if you're interested, read my book or listen to the audiobook. But more importantly, just sit down and look at your own life and look at the different areas where you feel like you might have some vulnerabilities or some weaknesses. Like, let's say you're somebody who's got $30,000 worth of student loan debt or credit card debt or what have you, right? that's a weakness that can be used against you in a number of ways. Even before we get to some sort of techno dystopia, like that can be used against you and that can hurt you. Trying to start taking steps to lessen that and to, decrease that debt and get to a place where you're a little bit more financially free, that can be valuable. Obviously not going to happen overnight. Maybe you're 100% dependent on the big box grocery stores right now, like the vast majority of people are. Then you could start to just visit a farmer's market on once a weekend. Just start with that, or watch a video on permaculture. Or if you are feeling extra motivated, go volunteer at a community garden or an urban farm in your area. Just put in 2 hours on a weekend. And just imagine if you put in 2 hours on one weekend for a month, all of a sudden you've got 8 hours of new experience by the end of that month. And you could be well on your way to lessening your dependence on those systems. Every time I've gone to a community garden, urban farm, I'm usually coming home with like free veggies and a little bit of whatever that they're growing, because there's usually an abundance and people are happy to give it away. That's just a small example of how you start to become more and more free of these systems. Again, it's not going to happen overnight. And also it's important to say that each one of us are going to have different goals, right? That's the important thing too, is to know your principles in the first place, because if you don't know your principles, then how do you know if you're not living in line with them? And then once you know what those principles are and you look around, you say, okay, I've kind of made some compromises. I have my money in JP Morgan Chase Bank because it's convenient, because they're close to my house. But actually the other day on the internet, I learned that they helped Jeffrey Epstein launder his money for his abuse victims. Maybe I don't want to support that bank. Maybe I want to go support a local credit union. When you start just taking these steps bit by bit to become less and less dependent on these systems that are not aligned with your values, but also in the long term are going to end up leading to, technological slavery.
Yeah, something I've been kind of become more aware of is, I guess, the medical industrial complex and how so many of us are dependent on so many medications. This is an industry I was actually in for a long time, but it's really tough, to separate and to learn alternative ways of taking care of yourselves and opting out of the standard, the standard care of, this prescription, and then take this one, and then, if that doesn't work, you go on to this one, and then by the time you're injecting yourself with, two different medications. But I kind of, that kind of rang true, because now, like, Shane's helped me a lot, kind of learning different ways to treat certain things that aren't the, mainstream way. And I also think of the supply chain and how fragile it is, and how I just can't imagine if, certain companies all of a sudden cannot get their active ingredients, and millions of people are not, taking their antipsychotics or antidepressants. And, but yeah, that's what I was thinking. And it is tough, coming off all of that. But I'm glad I'm at least conscious of it, because I think most people don't even realize that they become so dependent on so many medications. But
Yeah, it's important to just become aware, right? Because if you're not aware of the situation, you can't start to think of solutions or think of alternatives. And I think you point to a really big issue. I don't mean to, and I hope this nobody will take it this way, that the explanation I was just sharing, or even in my book where I go much deeper, is not intended to imply that any of these things are easy. In fact, as I said earlier, I think it takes time, energy, effort. It takes changing your habits, changing your routine. And that's usually much more difficult for people than just donating to a cause or voting for somebody. It takes much more introspection and effort. And I also empathize with, there are people who are, for whatever reasons, genetic, or just because maybe they didn't live a healthy life, are in situations where now they believe, or they feel, or maybe they genuinely are dependent on pharmaceuticals for one reason or another. And that's a complex situation. So I don't intend, and I'm not intending to oversimplify and say, just get off all the medical industrial complex overnight and figure that out, because I know that it's not as easy as that for many people.
So what I was going to say is that, yeah, not everyone can like raise their own animals and, farm their own, vegetables and stuff like that. But you can start taking incremental steps towards going in that direction. So instead of shopping at the big box grocery stores, you could probably find a farmer's market in your area and start there. And then you can start, eating healthier. And then when it comes to alternatives to, big pharma, there usually are several like natural and or holistic alternatives, some of which that Tracy and I have been getting into lately, such as say
The
black
black
seed
seed oil.
oil. Yeah, stuff like that. But it's little by little, it's baby steps. But as long as you keep taking those baby steps forward, then you'll eventually get somewhere. And I was glad to hear that you still actually advocate the above phone, because it does sound like it may be a little bit more user friendly alternative to some of the ghost phones. Now, I used to have a Pasnian ghost phone, which did have a very high learning curve on it, although it was one of the early ones, and I'm sure they've smoothed that out by now. But I was curious about the above phone, because that might be an alternative that more people could use.
Yeah. Yeah. And in fact, I think this is such a big piece of the conversation, just the technological aspect, because clearly we're all using technology, some of us more than others, but we're all very much plugged into the digital world. And I think doing so in a way that is as close to being in line with our values and our principles again, and protecting our privacy is absolutely important. So the above phone was started by my friend Hakeem Anwar, who I've known for years through activism. And he actually, like I said, I'm not a technologist. He is a technologist. He used to be a software developer and was working in the big tech industry before he kind of had his own journey and his own awakening, and realizing that he wanted to contribute his knowledge to something a bit more in line with his own, his own principles. And so he launched, I think it was 2021, maybe 2020, right around COVID. And it definitely, I think, has improved both their customer service, both just the tools they're offering. Like, it started out with just a basic like Google phone with some open source kind of decentralized privacy apps loaded on it. But now they've gone even further. They've added more apps on there. So, for example, the average person who's using a smartphone is probably used to using things like browsing the internet, Google Maps, maybe listening to music on Spotify or something like that, listening to podcasts. You can do all of those things on the above phone, but you can do so in a more private, secure way. So the phone is loaded with, instead of Google Maps, you have Organic Maps or Magic Earth. These are just open source map alternatives. And again, all of these things take a little bit of a learning curve, because, and this I think is a sign of how indoctrinated we have become to some of these corporate tools like Google, even the fact that Google has become a verb, and that most of us, if we don't see the way we're usually used to seeing Google Maps, it kind of, or you'd say Apple Maps or anything else you might use from the big corporates, your brain's like, wait, hold on, this looks different. I need to figure this out. And so there, it does take a little bit of a learning curve in figuring out how they work, but generally speaking, they work well. I've traveled all around Mexico and all around Texas, all around Mexico and the United States using these maps. And there are times, for example, if I'm in an area where I don't know really anything about where I'm at, I might still, there's actually a friend just introduced me to this yesterday. There's what they call a wrapped Google map. So it's kind of like in a container where it doesn't have access to your data. And you can sort of, let's say you want to search your location on Magic Earth and it's showing you one route, and you want to pull up the wrapped Google Maps and search it on there too, just to kind of compare and contrast, make sure it's giving you, a legit way. And then you can close the Google and go about your business. There's also NewPipe, which is basically a YouTube access point, but you don't have to have a YouTube account. It doesn't log your likes and your history and things like that for those of us who don't want those things, but still want to be able to maybe look up videos or things of that sort. And then I think the other cool feature of that is that you can download anything into video or audio format. My partner, Miriam, she listens to a lot of podcasts. I don't have a phone, but she uses the above phone. And so when she wants to listen to her favorite podcast, there's an app called AntennaPod that's loaded on there. And with AntennaPod, you can just go search whatever it is, the podcast you're looking for, subscribe to it. And again, you can download it. So then let's say you're traveling and you might be going through a zone with no cell service or no Wi-Fi or something like that. You actually have the audio or the videos saved on your device, which is, I think, another important part of not falling into the you will own nothing and be happy model, which is to try to get us all on subscriptions for everything. So you don't actually own any movies or own any DVDs or own any music. You just pay for it on a monthly basis. And if they want to take certain stuff off at any time, they can. So we're big advocates for downloading media as well. And there's a bunch of other features that it offers. They also have now expanded from the above phone. They've started to make laptops that are also de-Googled and uploaded with their own. They have their own operating system now, and they do offer their own email service. And it's a whole suite of tools for people who are interested in that. And I think even if people aren't ready to go to that next level, because I know that it is a big step. Phones are very personal for a lot of people. And so there will be some folks we've met who've actually bought an above phone and they're like, I haven't opened it yet. I've been too scared to try, or I'm nervous, or, and I get that we can have a whole lot of our lives on one tool or one set of services like Google, and it can feel like such a time consuming thing or a scary step to switch over. But I like to remind people that if you can't even be bothered to try a new tool, maybe you don't really want that privacy you say you care about. Maybe you don't really want to be free, right? If that's the limitation of what you're willing to do, it's like, oh no, I have to learn something new. I'm giving up. I'll just stick with what's comfortable. That
Yeah.
I think is a huge problem in our world. So I'll just mention a couple other resources real quick. Hakeem, they have abovephone.com, but his other main project is called Take Back Our Tech. People can find it at takebackourtech.org. And what I think it's a really great website because they have free webinars and resources to help people. For example, like I'm on a laptop that is running Linux instead of Microsoft or Google or Apple or something like that, and that takes time to figure out. They've tried to make it as simple and easy to do as possible. Really easy guides for people who want to switch over. There's a couple other websites I'll throw out for people who are interested in this technological piece and trying to exit from some of these systems. One is nomoregoogle.com, nomoregoogle.com. And I don't work for any of these websites. These are just resources I like to give out. Another one is called privacytools.io, privacytools.io. And basically you'll go there and it'll say like email, browser, just all the things you normally use, and it'll give you alternatives. Now, I encourage you still to do your own research and vetting because I can't speak to everyone that they propose as an alternative. Some are better than others, but like, for example, I'm using LibreWolf, which is a browser that is a sort of a fork of Firefox. Firefox is pretty good, but LibreWolf is like even more strengthened and more privacy. So when I do watch videos or go through websites, all the ads are blocked, all the privacy stuff is up, and trackers are blocked and things like that. So there are just little steps like that we can start to take to improve our lives and to, again, live more in line with our values. Another big one I'll mention, I use CryptPad, CRYPT pad, and I use CryptPad. You can just go to cryptpad.org. And they have everything that you're already doing: sheets, documents, forms, everything that you do with Google or Microsoft, you can do in a alternative method with CryptPad, which is encrypted and is open source and is not tracking you, and it's not part of the whole big tech scheme. So again, for a lot of people, I know so many brilliant people who are doing great things, and they're in the freedom space, they're in the health freedom space, they're in the conscious, transformational, spiritual, whatever space, and they're all on Google, they're all on Gmail, they're all on Google Docs and calendars. This is not an attack on anybody. This is just saying, like, maybe that's an area we could start, right? That's not a huge investment of time. You just have to, it could be, I guess, a little tedious. Okay, you got to switch all your contacts over to a new email or switch your documents over to this thing. But again, if we're really after trying to live in line with our values, which is really what I strive for, then I think the effort is worth it, the time to learn something new. And thankfully, there are people like Hakeem, Take Back Our Tech, and these other websites which have tried to make it super simple and just put that information for people. Because like I was saying earlier, this isn't the kind of thing you're going to hear in the mainstream. You're not really going to go, I think, to any electronics store and find a laptop that is not big tech. And it's definitely not going to be loaded with anything other than Google or Microsoft on it. And so if we want to get away from those systems, then we need to support those who are trying to build these alternatives, or who are at least trying to give us the knowledge we need to participate in them.
Yeah, it's really good you said that, because someone did say to take Google Maps. Like, that is the one that if you're going to take something off your phone, like, that is the one to take off first. But then I didn't know, okay, well, then it was time to find something. It all routes you back to Google Maps if you use the other, like Yelp or something. So I didn't know what the other alternatives were. Because we're kind of running out of time, I did want to ask you, because my viewers are they always want to know whoever I have on, they want to get your opinion on what do you think is causing these fires that we've been discussing.
So, I look forward to interviewing you guys next so I can learn more about your work. I've dipped into some of what Shane has sent me and what you guys have sent me through email. And I've, watched some other people reporting on not just Lahaina, but the LA fires and, wildfires in years past and things of that sort. And even going back to 9/11, and to seeing the 9/11 attacks and certain things that, even controlled demolition theories can't fully explain. For example, those who've followed the 9/11 investigations, Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, and some other groups are mainly focused on the hypothesis that there were explosives in the buildings and that they caused them to come down. But there were other buildings besides the two Twin Towers and Building 7 that were impacted. And there's some interesting pictures that honestly look very similar to some of the things we've seen in the wildfires, where you've seen cars just completely toasted and things like that. And I've actually asked Richard Gage, who is the original founder of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. I asked him years ago, so what do you think about these things? And he admitted well, we can't explain that, and so he was sort of like acknowledging that there had to be something else at play. In terms of directed energy weapons, I 100% believe and acknowledge that the technology exists and is a real thing, and more people need to be aware of that, because it's still kind of in that realm of like sci-fi. You're crazy for even talking about such an idea, as I'm sure you guys have come to see the way people respond to that. But yeah, I don't claim to be an expert in that field, and I'm definitely not an expert in any of the specific fire incidents. So as I said, I definitely look forward to learning more from you guys. And I know y'all did all the work to put a whole book together on it. But generally speaking, I don't put it past these people. And then as far as like the relationship to the whole Agenda 2030, the smart cities projects, and the coincidence that I've surely noticed, even with just my sort of overview lens of looking at this topic, that there does seem to be quite a bit of overlap between the original Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030 maps about rewilding, as well as plans for smart cities in certain places, that those places seem to be impacted by natural disasters, and then that land goes up for a pretty good price, and people are able to come in and say, hey, we're going to build now smart cities here, we're going to build whether it's just people profiting real estate wise, and we're going to build big condos here like we're seeing stuff over in Gaza, or if it's like about we're going to bring in smart cities now, 5G, etc., and kind of push people out. I don't put any of those things past these psychopaths at the top, that they would have these sort of methods. And as Shane mentioned as well earlier, I have been researching weather warfare and weather modification, geoengineering, since really the beginning of my work. And again, another topic that many people are dismissive of. And I think in some cases, there are people who don't do a great job reporting on it, because, like, for example, I don't use the word chemtrails because I don't think it's helpful. And I think it's just been, even if technically chemical trails is somewhat accurate, I think it's just a term that sort of has already been programmed into the mind of the masses to shut you down. But when you tell people about geoengineering, which does exist and is a real science, or cloud seeding, or all the different types of geoengineering that exist, stratospheric aerosol engineering, all the different terms. So those are real terms that we can point to. So I try to be more accurate in that situation. But 100%, I mean, my research has shown that, for example, I started researching the hurricane aspects to controlling hurricane weather warfare, because Houston, where I'm originally from, was hit by a number of hurricanes. But in 2017 especially, there was a massive one that just sort of took a wild turn and came out of nowhere. And I dove deep into that. And you can find, going back to the late 1800s, of research of studying how to control it and steer hurricanes. You can find the government talking about it in the early 2000s, and then they allegedly shut those programs down. So I definitely know that this technology exists, not only in the form of the planes and spraying, but in these bigger things. And I know that there's always been concerns about things like HARP as well. But as I said, I don't claim to be an expert on that, and I look forward to learning more.
All right. Awesome. Okay. So I think that's,
well, before we run out of time, I did want to try to touch on the Pyramid of Power real quick, because I know he's putting together the last episode of his Pyramid of Power series. And I just wanted to have him touch on that real fast.
I appreciate the opportunity, brother. Thank you for that. And thank you both for having me again. I really do appreciate the conversation. So yeah, the Pyramid of Power is, I guess you could say, it's a labor of love. Actually, Shane, when we were hanging out in 2018, you probably would have heard me give the original version of this. This was a 2.5 hour presentation that I was giving when I was doing a tour of the US back in 2018. And the original idea was like, okay, I talk about solutions all the time, and it was still a solutions focused thing, but I really wanted to sort of paint a picture for people and help them understand how the different pieces of the puzzle interlock. We're talking about smart cities. I got a chapter on big wireless and that whole agenda. We talked about big tech, talk about weather warfare. There's a lot of different pieces of the puzzle, these so-called conspiracies, but I don't think too many people really kind of put them together in a way that's understandable of how they interlock and create one kind of system, or what I call the Pyramid of Power. And so after doing that tour and recognizing that maybe asking people to sit through a 3-hour lecture is not the best way to get this information out, maybe I should turn it into a documentary series, I decided in 2021 to do just that. And it started out being a 12 episode series, and it is now evolved into 17 episodes. All 16 episodes are available for free. You can find them at thepyramidofpower.net. It's a super basic website that's going to be revamped soon, because I'm just focused on getting it done. But all of the information is there. All of my transcript, all my resources, everything that I talk about, completely fact-based, is there in video and audio form. It's also been translated to a number of different languages. And the idea with this was that I wanted to create something that could put all of, take my own research as well as the best books and documentaries out there that woke many of us up, right? Like, how do you take all that information instead of expecting your friends and family to watch hundreds of documentaries and read hundreds of books? Take the best bits of information from those things, condense them down to 30 minutes or less to make them bingeable for the Netflix generation. And I think we've mostly achieved this. I think there's about 4 or 5 episodes that are about more close to 35, 40, 45 minutes long because they were just such huge topics. But for the most part, we've stayed in that range. There's episodes as short as 15 to 20 minutes and as high as 45 minutes. And the idea was that we were going to release them in seasons. So we have what I call 4 seasons, these 16 episodes, and it gets progressively deeper and more complex and more quote unquote conspiratorial as we go along. Starts out really basic, looking at the education system, then looking at the establishment media, then big tech. And we're just getting deeper and deeper and deeper and more complex and naming names of people and institutions and how these things are all interrelated. My other goal, of course, like with all of my work, was to promote and highlight solutions. So we aim to have the best research references from other books, other documentaries, as well as my own original interviews and my original research condensed down to 30 minutes or less. And every episode ends with, okay, so now we've learned about how the establishment media tries to manipulate our minds. Here's some ideas to consider. Here's some solutions to consider. Like I was saying earlier, there's not always a perfect solution. Sometimes the solution is just, we need to spread the word about this. We need to get this out to more people. But I've tried my best to present some ideas at the end of each episode. And then every episode ends with, if you want to learn more about this topic, please read this book or watch this documentary, and it has recommendations for every episode. And so now we are, after 5 years, coming to the conclusion of this. I'm actually, once we wrap up here, getting back to the writing of the final 17th episode, which is aiming to answer the question, who or what is at the top of this pyramid? And it features interviews with James Corbett, Richard Grove, David Icke, Peter Dale Scott, Adam Green. I'm trying to get Daniel Eshelin, Larkin Rose, a few other people that I'm just forgetting, but a number of just G. Edward Griffin, of course, really old school, the original guy who's been blowing the whistle on all these things. That have, some of them have been featured through different episodes, but they're all, Mark Passio is another one. They're all going to be on this final episode, each of them answering that question in their own way. Who do you think is at the top of the pyramid? And we're going to explore these different topics. Is it the Jesuits? Is it the Freemasons? Is it the Jews, the Zionists? I'm going to go through every controversial answer that people propose, let them say their piece, provide some information about the research. And of course, I'll have my own thoughts on whether I think they're wrong or right. And we're going to go through those. And then, some people believe it's Satanists. Some people think it's aliens or something otherworldly. We're going to explore all these different ideas, and I will be drawing some conclusions at the end. But this is definitely one of the biggest projects I've worked on in my entire life, because it's been a 5-year effort. And this is, I feel like once it's done, it's going to be something I will promote for the rest of my life, because once we finish this final episode and we release it in May, then we're going to have all 17 episodes available for free online everywhere, as they already are. But we're also going to turn it into a companion book, turn all the scripts into a book that people can read along and see all the facts and sources. And then we plan to turn it into DVDs and USB drives. And I just plan to push it out there as far as I can. And I've been really blessed with the response over the last couple of years. People have been so supportive, and I've had families tell me that they've used it to homeschool their kids, had their kids like watch certain episodes and do reports on it. And had some friends who were like, oh, I'm a substitute teacher at this school, and I played it during one of our classes and things of that sort. So it's been really cool to just see how it's getting out there. And so once it's done, that I feel like that's just the beginning. But right now we are doing a crowdfunding campaign. The entire project has been completely crowdfunded from just listeners, viewers, and supporters. And all of that money has gone to pay my editors. So I do all the research, I write the scripts, and I do the narration. And then I work with a talented team of independent editors who are, just activists like us, but their skills on the editing side, and they make it pop and beautiful and a fun thing to watch. And so all the money goes towards paying them right now. I'm going to get paid later once we start getting this out to the world. Thankfully, we've just been able to crowdfund it to this point to get to 16 episodes done with $30,000, which, as grateful as I am for that, is still a fairly low budget for all the work we've done. And I'm just really grateful for my editor for, being willing to work with me on sort of a little bit of a pay cut from what they're used to. So right now we're funding for the final episode until April 1st. I'll give you guys the link and y'all can share it with the show notes if you like. And anybody who wants to check it out, go watch the series, thepyramidofpower.net. See if you like it. If you want to throw us a few bucks, great. If not, share it. Just get it out to people. That's what matters the most. But we will be we're trying to raise at minimum $5,000, and that will all go to my editor. If we raise anything beyond that, we're aiming for 10,000. Then that will go towards the production of the DVDs and the USB drives. And we just launched on Monday, and I'm proud to say that at last I checked before we started this interview, we were about to hit $3,000. So we're doing pretty good, and really grateful to everybody who's contributing. And yeah, if anybody out there wants to support, this is just another one of my ventures to try to get our brothers and sisters in our human family to question the world around us, and more importantly, trying to look for solutions.
All right, that's awesome. I want to know that answer. You know, I get asked that, and I get so many answers, and I'm like, I really don't know who's at the top. But thank you so much, Derrick, for spending all this time with us. And I'm sure at some point we'll love to have you back and update us with your projects. And is there anything else? I think that is going to do it. So we'll put all of Derrick's information that he spoke about in the description, so you guys can go check it out yourself. And you said May of this year, the series will be completed. So I'm really excited to be able to watch that. So yeah, that's going to do it for today. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you.
Bye.